So I've often assumed that really high carbon steels, the reason that they lose little tiny bits of their edge faster is because the presence of more carbides. And you hear people talking about carbides being damaged and carbides popping out or being torn out. But I actually read an article on Maxamet on thescienceofsharp.com, which it doesn't debunk the fact that carbide tear out can or does happen, but it shows that it's way less common than what we think. And actually microchipping and hardness may be a little bit, or lack of toughness, I guess you would say, could actually be at play far more often than carbide tear out, which I actually had no idea about that. But it sort of brings to light this thing that I've described, a common sort of proverbial picture of carbides, like they're the rocks in a piece of concrete, but actually the carbides are tied to the steel much more tightly than rocks are tied into a piece of concrete. Anyway, carbides are much more robust and resilient, it would appear, than what many of us have often believed. And it's a bit more rare than many of us have believed that they simply like crack and pop out and do all kinds of things like that. And actually, I think we're largely unaware of the effects of toughness and microchipping. So I've said in the past frequently that I really prefer tough steels because they hold on to carbides better. Well, they actually may not be holding on to the carbides better so much as they hold on to themselves better. They actually have better cohesion that resists the edge chipping out. And the steel and the carbides together have a higher average sort of toughness. Another misconception I've had is thinking that coarser grits dig deeper into the stone and plow out these massive troughs. There's a whole article on the Science of Sharp that shows that sometimes abrasives in a stone will hook in and they'll create a little curl of metal that gets pulled out, a micro curl of metal. But sometimes they actually present a surface that's not super sharp, and they sort of like ride along the top of the metal and they plow through it, and they actually displace metal to the two sides. It's a crazy article. I'll try to put another link in the description, but that's another thing that I just had no idea. So sometimes coarser grits do more plowing, and actually when Todd did his test, I believe the 600 grit cut deeper swaths in the metal than I think like a 250 or a 300 grit. The 250 or 300 grit did wide ones, but most of them were plowing through the steel and sort of like displacing it rather than actually cutting a curl of metal out and cutting deep channels through it, which I had no idea about. Another thing that I was completely unaware of is that most diamond abrasives, unless you go through a really rigorous multi-step process, will leave a bit of a foil burr on the edge of the knife. And you actually need to use certain stropping techniques or edge leading strokes or a different kind of stone, oftentimes, to actually fully eliminate the burr. I didn't even know that there were burrs that existed that could affect edge performance that were so small that you couldn't feel them. But it seems very clear to me now from this testing, from my recent experience with new stones, and from the articles on Todd's site that can indeed happen. Another thing that's of note to me is that some of the edges that I have gotten to whittle hair, actually, when you put them to use, a little foil burr seems to break off. And it seems to suggest that hair whittling is not invalid, but hair whittling is not a universal indicator. You can actually create an apex that whittles hair, and that takes a lot of skill. Or you can create a burr that whittles hair that then breaks off quite easily. And it's very difficult to tell which one you've done. So I think I've done both now, but I'm definitely realizing that oftentimes some of my high performance edges, there's a little bit of burr left there that's going to be detrimental to edge retention. things. Another thing that he did, which I thought was really cool, is he actually did an article on Maxamet, and he tried several different methods of sharpening it. But his favorite one is he worked up like a black kind of slurry on the top of one of his normal traditional whetstones, and after sharpening Maxamet to a fine apex, he sharpened just the apex with this natural stone, and it actually carved some of the metal around the carbides out, so it presented the carbides. There's like a really cool, maybe I'll try to get the picture and throw it up here. There's a really cool picture of all these undamaged carbides sticking out of the Maxamet blade. And so I'd like to experiment with some of that stuff because I just wasn't aware. Man, I recommend if you're passionate about sharpening and you want to have really well-founded information to add this to your arsenal, I would say go to thescienceofsharp.com, hit the index button and look through the names of the articles and just start at the top and read anything that sounds interesting to you, because it has literally changed the way I view so many of these things in a really good way, and it's equipped me to sharpen a lot better. Another thing that I'd recommend is going to knifegrinders.au and checking out the research that's been done by Vadim. There's some really groundbreaking discoveries. He has some really cool methods for testing edge toughness, not just wear resistance. He'll put like a steel roller across the edge and bend it and see how many times it bends. And he's got some real fascinating research. I'd recommend checking those out. Read up as much as you can. That's my recommendation, because I am finding the more that I practice, the more that I research, the more that I buy new gear and try, I find the less I knew. I thought I had things sort of sorted, but actually I have a lot to learn. So thinking that dual grit was very broad and that it could be done with any stone, any sharpener, any method, any skill level, I thought, well, that's sort of sorted. That's like a gift that I've given the knife community. So I got excited about pioneering all these different playlists on my channel, which has been quite fun, and it's been fun investing in different things. But I think where we go from here is I'm realizing that actually dual grit itself needs a lot more testing for it to give the maximum benefit to people, for them to know what stones to buy if they want to utilize it, for them to know what methods work best. So I think that this moment is going to sort of mark a shift for me away from building up my other playlists, my DIY stuff. I'll still be doing the outdoors testing because that's just something I do with my job, and I really want to find a good blade for that. But I think I'm going to shift heavily towards a bit more sharpening, testing, and research. So far, most of my tests have been sort of qualitative. If you know the difference between qualitative and quantitative, it's like qualitative is a quality, like does it do something or does it not do something? Is it this color or is it that color? But quantitative is like a number, a measurement itself. And what I think the Maxamet fail has really showed me is that with these qualitative tests, I don't actually even know when a dual grit edge has been successfully applied. I don't have the ability to see with my eyes or feel with my fingers whether I've actually done what I'm aiming to do. And so I really need to shift from qualitative testing, which is like, does it slice a piece of paper or not? Well, you don't need a dual grit edge to slice paper. A normal fine apex will do that, right? Does it still slice a tomato? I think that's a fun test, but again, it's quite qualitative. It shows a threshold. There's a point beyond it where it will no longer be aggressive enough to cut through the skin of a tomato. But it shows whether you're past the point, but it doesn't show this whole scale underneath and this whole scale above. And so what I'm going to try to do is a bit of an overhaul of how I test sharpness and shift things from qualitative analysis to quantitative data, charting, graphing, writing down numbers. I'm really excited. To be clear, that's not a criticism of other testers' methods. I think if you're not looking for a dual grit edge or you're not researching how that specifically works, then a paper cut test is perfectly fine. I think that Pete's data has been wonderful and has given insights to so many of us. And there are so many other people who are doing tests that are sort of qualitative, like does it do this or does it not do this? And I think there's some great data there, but I think that if we're actually going to discover anything about the dual grit method, we need to get a bit more precise. I've ordered a Bess PT50A sharpness tester. If you don't know what that is, you can look at a video here. Basically, it's a machine that runs a monofilament line, and you press the edge through it, and it will give you a reading of how much resistance or how much force you needed to put into the cut to break through the monofilament line, sort of like a fishing line. So it'll give you a measurement, like down to the very gram, of how much pressure was needed to break that line, or how much force or weight, I guess you could say. What I plan to do with that right now is Todd Simpson has recommended to me that we start with simple steels, basically because what we found out about the dual grit is that it performs well because of the shaping of this burr, and the carbides are going to play a really minor role in that. The steel matrix itself is actually going to be the pivotal part to analyze. And so by using blades that have a low carbon content, that are simple steel, that most of the carbon is just dissolved into the steel and there's not a lot of chunks of carbide, we'll be able to more effectively ascertain the behaviors of the steel itself. I'm hoping to start with a blade that's sharpened the exact way that I sharpen the knives for Pete, with the 250 grit and the 6000, and cut through rope and do periodic testing on the Bess machine. So every 10 cuts or something like that, I'll see how much the apex has worn away and widened, and sort of chart the dulling of that. And I'll pit it against a fine edge that's sharpened as fine as I can get it, and do the same thing, and sort of like take Bess measurements incrementally and plot the sort of dulling of that. And then I'll take a normal coarse edge that I would sharpen, like maybe like 600 grit, and try to deburr it pretty well and do the same thing. And those will be sort of our controls, and we'll figure out how does a dual grit edge, what's the sort of arc and trajectory of dulling against a normal fine edge and against a normal coarse edge. First, I'll isolate everything and try different angles. And once I find the angle that it seems to be performing best at, then I'll isolate that angle and try different fine stones, then isolate that and try different coarse stones, and go through and see if there's anything that I have right now, or any method that I can use right now, even different strops, which actually take that dual grit sharpening performance boost and even extend it further and further, would be my hope. Trying a whole bunch of different methods and angles and sharpening stones and strops ought to really help us wrap our head around what is going on with the dual grit edge in a simple steel. And once we've sort of sorted that out, we should be able to move. Probably I'll move on to steels with a bit more carbon and more carbide-y steels. Do a similar thing and see how they respond to different stones and steels, and then hopefully we can create an edge that lasts really well even on a steel like Maxamet. That would be my hope, but we'll see how it goes. That's a great question. So right now I have a bunch of gear that's on order from the US. It's going to take a little bit of time to ship over to me, but I've been saving up with donations on Patreon, and I've ordered the sharpness testing device and some other things which are making their way towards me. And as soon as I get them, I'm going to do some initial experimentation and get to know how they work. And then I'm going to launch into this new testing, which hopefully will produce more informative, more precise data, some fresh outlook on how a dual grit edge works. In the meantime, I've pre-published some videos, so the videos coming up in the next month, they won't contain this new information. Just filter them a little bit because some of the perspective may be a little off. I usually try to schedule my videos ahead, so I'm just gonna let the ones that are scheduled to publish. They're real fun, and then there may be a little bit of a lapse. Once I run out of those videos, there may be a couple of weeks where I'm still gearing up and preparing and getting ready to do the testing. And after those weeks there'll be a little bit of a break in my publishing schedule. Then I'll post up my new video of the new tests. And when you see that go up, that will sort of mark the beginning. I'm going to try to get back to a weekly schedule with no breaks, where I do a large video release every week, and we kind of plow through and discover these different elements of sharpening. And I'll throw in some videos of other themes for those of you who are not sharpening nerds, but it's going to be a big emphasis of the channel from now on for the foreseeable future. So thanks so much to my Patreon supporters. I literally could not do any of this stuff without you guys. You're awesome. Thanks to my subscribers. Thanks to you guys who have just came and visited and are viewing. Thanks to those of you who have followed the journey of discovering this new sharpening method. It's been a lot of fun. You guys are awesome. For now, I'll just say peace out. Bye.